Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to thank the member for Mackellar for raising this important motion. We are colleagues, after all, and doctors, and I fully understand the health impacts of climate change, but I would urge that we widen the lens, that we don't just restrict ourselves to human health. There is this concept of One Health where we encompass human, environmental, and animal health, and we're all in this together. So I think it's important to reframe the concept of health into a much broader concept. When it comes to climate action, we as a government have well and truly moved beyond the whether and the if to now concentrating on the how. We understand the economic, environmental, and health imperatives of climate change. We are, after all, living through the era of consequences. The focus really now is how do we decarbonise, and how do we do this as fast as possible? What are the bottlenecks and how do we overcome them? It's a far more nuanced approach. I have heard many a time the problem of climate change, a wicked problem indeed, couched in purely scientific terms. I would say if only it were that simple. If this was a purely scientific problem, it would have been solved. It would have been solved decades ago. Solved in the way we found a cure for polio, in the way we eradicated smallpox, in the way we put a man on the moon, in the era of blackboards and chalk. This is not a purely scientific problem. This is a social problem, a scientific problem, and a political problem, which is why it has not been solved. The government and the crossbench are in furious agreement regarding the need for climate action, but where we differ is in balancing the competing priorities. And what are they? The climate emergency, no question. Energy security, absolutely. And the uncomfortable truth that Australia has been over-reliant on fossil fuels for revenue and for economic security for too long. With respect to energy security, this is a red line for government. Australians, their businesses and industry must have access to reliable, round-the-clock energy. To not do so is simply irresponsible and frankly unsafe. Then, of course, there is this challenge of diversifying our economy. Australia is a fossil fuel giant and has been for decades. We are the highest exporter of coal in the world and the highest producer of gas in the OECD. Coal and gas are our number 2 and number 3 exports, earning in 2021 $110 billion and $70 billion respectively. These resources have made us rich as a country, and we have our regional communities in places like the Hunter and in Collinsville to thank. This revenue has helped pay for hospitals, for roads, for infrastructure, for schools, for research, and it has also supported our local communities. But it has come at a cost, and that cost is pollution, which is now fueling the climate emergency. So while I too want us to move as fast as possible away from fossil fuels, we must have replacement revenue from other sources, or we risk compromising those services that Australians rightfully expect. We in this government and this generation will be the ones that tip that balance, and it's already happening. With the passage of our climate bill through the lower house, we are poised to become a renewable energy superpower. This is not empty rhetoric. There are already several large-scale projects that are either coming online or in advanced stages of planning. Within a week of the passage of that bill, the Minister for Climate Change and Energy announced that 6 offshore wind farms were coming online. BlackRock, the world's largest investment manager, has committed $1 billion to large-scale grid batteries, the largest investment that they have internationally. We also have Sun Cable, who is a company that has this audacious plan to export sunshine from the Northern Territory to Singapore and Indonesia, using a cable stretching 4,400 kilometres long. What I would say is that to our young people in particular, an industry of despair has sprung up around climate change. And the problem with this is that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When hope walks out the door, so does motivation. And I would say to our people, reject this, because this has no place in our worldview. There is a long history of humanity overcoming the odds, whether that be rebuilding after World War II, whether that be eradicating polio, or indeed closing the hole in the ozone layer. Several people said it couldn't happen, but we did. We must rely on Australians' ingenuity and imagination to get us through this, and we will.